The bank's name flashed across my phone screen, and my stomach dropped. This was the third call this week. I let it ring as I stared out the window of my apartment, watching the October rain trace crooked paths down the glass. 3 months ago, my parents had looked me straight in the eye and told me they didn't need my help. But banks don't call about mortgages that are being paid on time. "We're fine, Olivia," Mom had insisted, her voice carrying the familiar steel edge that always appeared when money came up. "Your father and I have everything under control." Dad had nodded beside her, but wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first clue. The phone stopped ringing, and seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. I took a deep breath and pressed play, putting it on speaker as I continued packing my weekend bag. "Hello, this message is for Olivia Chin. This is Amanda from First Capital Bank regarding the Morgan property on Lakeside Drive. This is our third attempt to reach you this week. Please call us back at your earliest convenience to discuss payment options before further action is taken." My parents' address, my parents' home, my childhood home. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the half-packed weekend bag forgotten. How had it come to this? I'd offered to help them 3 months ago when I'd gotten my promotion at the architectural firm. The raise was substantial, enough that I could easily help them with their mortgage payments and still live comfortably. But their pride had gotten in the way. "We raised you, not the other way around," Dad had said, puffing his chest out like he always did when he was trying to look more confident than he felt. "You save your money for your future, for a house of your own someday." But now the bank was calling me. Not them, me. Something wasn't adding up. I scrolled through my contacts and called my mother. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I called my father next. Same result. It was Friday afternoon. They should both be home by now. The knot in my stomach tightened. I finished packing quickly, throwing in an extra outfit just in case. I had planned to drive to my parents' house this weekend anyway. They lived only an hour outside the city, and I tried to visit at least once a month. But now the leisurely drive I'd planned for the morning seemed too far away. I grabbed my keys, locked my apartment, and headed for my car. Traffic would be bad on a Friday evening, but I needed answers and I wasn't going to get them over the phone. The drive gave me too much time to think. My parents had always been proud people. They'd immigrated to America before I was born, worked multiple jobs, saved every penny. They'd bought their modest home when I was 5 years old, and my mother had cried when they got the keys. It was the American dream realized, a home of their own, with a yard where their daughter could play. When had things started going wrong? Dad had retired from his factory job 2 years ago. Mom still worked part-time at the local community college as an administrative assistant. They should have been fine. They'd always told me they were fine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as rain pelted my windshield. The wipers couldn't keep up, and neither could my thoughts. Why would the bank call me? How did they even have my number? By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Their modest, ranch-style home looked the same as always, neat lawn, trimmed hedges. The wind chimes Mom had hung on the porch, still tinkling in the breeze. Nothing about the outside suggested the financial crisis the phone call had implied. I noticed the living room curtains move slightly. They knew I was here. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and headed for the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. "Olivia!" Mom exclaimed, forcing brightness into her voice. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." She pulled me into a hug, the familiar scent of her jasmine perfume enveloping me. "I decided to beat the morning traffic," I said, hugging her back. I didn't mention the call. Not yet. I needed to see their faces when I brought it up. Dad appeared behind her, his slight frame looking somehow smaller than I remembered from just a month ago. Had he lost weight? "There's my architect," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Come in. Your mother just made some tea." I followed them inside. The house was spotless, as always. Mom had never tolerated clutter, but something felt off. The thermostat was set lower than usual, and I noticed Dad was wearing a sweater despite the mild fall temperatures. We sat at the kitchen table, the same wooden set they'd had for 20 years. Mom poured tea into mismatched mugs while Dad asked about my drive and the weather. Small talk. Safe talk. I waited until we all had steaming mugs in front of us before I spoke. "The bank called me today," I said, watching their faces carefully. "Actually, they've called 3 times this week." The change was immediate. Mom's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Dad's shoulders slumped as if all the air had gone out of him at once. "Why would First Capital Bank be calling me about your mortgage?" I asked softly. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the gentle ticking of the rooster clock on the wall, a housewarming gift I'd bought them years ago. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't want to worry you." "Worry me about what?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. Mom placed her mug down carefully, aligning it precisely with the coaster beneath. "Your father's medical bills," she said quietly. "Medical bills? What medical bills?" I looked between them, confusion and anger rising in equal measure. "Dad, are you sick?" "It's nothing serious," he said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "Just some tests. A minor procedure. The heart specialist." "Heart specialist?" I interrupted. "Since when do you have heart problems?" "It's just high blood pressure and some arrhythmia," Mom jumped in. "The doctor said it's manageable with medication." "But our insurance didn't cover all the tests," Dad added. "And the medication is expensive. We had to make some choices." "So you chose to stop paying the mortgage?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "We didn't stop completely," Mom said defensively. "We've been making partial payments when we can. The bank has been understanding mostly." "Until now," Dad said with a sigh. I took a moment to process this. But why would they call me? I'm not on your mortgage. My parents exchanged a look that made my heart sink. There was more. "We needed a loan modification last year," Mom explained carefully. "After your father retired, the payments were too high. The bank required a co-signer." I stared at them. "You used my name as a co-signer?" Without telling me. Dad had the grace to look ashamed. "We used your old signature card from when we helped you open your first bank account. We didn't think." "You didn't think I'd find out?" I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Or you didn't think it was wrong to commit fraud using your daughter's name?" "Olivia, please!" Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We were desperate. We were going to lose the house. Everything we worked for. And now you might still lose it. Plus you've put my credit at risk. I was shouting now, something I rarely did with my parents. But the betrayal cut deep. "I offered to help you. 3 months ago, I sat right here at this table and offered you money to help with your expenses, and you said no. You lied to my face." "We never meant to involve you," Dad said, his voice trembling. "We thought we could catch up on the payments before it became an issue." "Well, it's an issue now." I paced the small kitchen, trying to calm my racing heart. "The bank is threatening further action. Do you know what that means? Foreclosure proceedings. Collections. My name dragged through the mud alongside yours." Mom began to cry silently, tears trailing down her weathered cheeks. Dad looked older than his 67 years as he stared at his cooling tea. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. These were my parents. Despite their terrible decision, they'd always done what they thought was best for me. They'd worked themselves to the bone to give me opportunities they never had. "How much do you owe?" I asked, my voice softer now. Dad hesitated, then went to a drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. Bank statements, medical bills, mortgage notices. He placed them on the table with shaking hands. 3 months of full mortgage payments, he said, plus late fees. I sat back down and started going through the papers. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd feared. Dad's medical bills were substantial, over $15,000, not covered by insurance. Their savings had been depleted. They'd been juggling bills, paying just enough on each to keep the lights on and the roof over their heads. And the medication, how much is that costing monthly? $412, Mom said without hesitation. She'd clearly memorized the number. I did some quick, mental calculations. I could cover the mortgage arrears easily with my savings. The ongoing payments would stretch my budget, but with my recent promotion, it was doable. Dad's medical bills would take longer to pay off, but I could set up a payment plan. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, looking between them. When I offered to help before, why did you turn me down? We've always taken care of you, Dad said softly. Not the other way around. It's not how things are supposed to be. We were embarrassed, Mom added. Ashamed. We're supposed to have it all figured out by now. I thought about all the sacrifices they'd made for me, the extra jobs they'd worked to pay for my college application fees, the way they'd never bought new clothes for themselves, but always made sure I had what I needed for school. The pride in their voices when they told friends and family that their daughter was a professional architect in the city. Let me help you, I said firmly. No loans, no forgeries, just your daughter helping her parents the way you've always helped me. We can't accept, Dad began. You can and you will, I interrupted. But we need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. No more pride getting in the way of practical solutions. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. This time I didn't pull away. We should have told you, she said, her voice breaking. We were just so ashamed. I squeezed her hand. Tomorrow morning, we're going to call the bank together. We'll explain the situation and set up a payment plan for the arrears. I'll make the first payment immediately to stop any foreclosure proceedings. Then we're going to talk to Dad's doctor about these medical bills. There might be assistance programs we can apply for. Olivia, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. We never wanted to be a burden to you. You're not a burden, I said firmly. You're my parents, and families help each other. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Dad had stuck to my ceiling when I was 10. They still glowed faintly after all these years. I thought about how my parents had created a world for me where I believed I could reach for the stars. They'd sacrificed so much to give me that confidence, that freedom. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their desire to protect me, to maintain their role as the providers rather than the ones needing provision, had nearly cost them everything. I heard their bedroom door open down the hall, followed by Dad's soft footsteps padding toward the kitchen. Unable to sleep too, I guessed. I slipped out of bed and followed. I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, the moonlight from the window casting long shadows across his face. He looked up when I entered. I couldn't sleep, he said unnecessarily. Me neither. I sat across from him. I keep thinking about what could have happened, he continued after a moment. If we'd lost the house, where would we go? How would we start over at our age? That's not going to happen, I assured him. We'll figure this out together. He reached across the table and took my hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around mine. When did my little girl become so strong? I learned from the best, I said, squeezing his hand. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day's revelations still heavy but somehow more manageable in the quiet darkness of the kitchen. Your mother and I, we come from a different time, a different culture, Dad finally said. Where we grew up, children respect their parents by not questioning them. Parents take care of children, not the other way around. At least not until the parents are very old. I know, I said, but we're here now in this situation, and holding on to those old ways nearly cost you your home. He nodded slowly. Pride is expensive, he said with a sad smile. Too expensive, I'm beginning to think. There's nothing shameful about needing help, I told him, especially not from family. In my head, I know this, he said, tapping his temple. But in my heart. He placed his other hand over his chest. In my heart, it feels like failure. You haven't failed, Dad, I said firmly. You've succeeded in raising a daughter who can and wants to help her parents when they need it. That's not failure. That's the best kind of success. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes glistening in the moonlight. Then he nodded once, decisively, as if accepting something difficult but necessary. Tomorrow we call the bank, he said. Tomorrow we call the bank, I agreed. When I returned to my bedroom, I noticed a light under my parents' door. Mom was awake too. I thought about knocking, checking on her, but decided against it. She'd talk when she was ready. We all needed time to process. I lay back down under my childhood stars and thought about the months ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be financial strain, difficult conversations, and probably more revelations as we untangled their financial situation. But for the first time in what must have been months, my parents wouldn't be facing it alone. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something important. Sometimes helping those you love means letting them help you in return. My parents had spent their lives teaching me strength, resilience, and independence. Now I had the chance to teach them something in return. That true family bonds work both ways, and that accepting help can sometimes require more courage than giving it. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes, my favorite breakfast since childhood. When I wandered into the kitchen, still in my pajamas, I found Mom at the stove, expertly flipping a golden brown pancake. "Morning," she said, her voice subdued but steady. "I thought you might want breakfast before we make that call." Dad sat at the table already dressed, a cup of coffee in front of him and the mortgage paperwork stacked neatly beside it. He'd clearly been up for hours. "I found our original loan documents," he said as I sat down, "and I've made notes about when the payments started becoming irregular. I want to be completely honest with the bank." I reached for the papers, scanning the dates and amounts. "This is good. It shows you've been making efforts, even if the payments weren't complete." Mom placed a stack of pancakes in front of me. "Eat first," she said. "Business later." We ate mostly in silence, the weight of the day ahead hanging over us. But unlike the night before, the silence felt purposeful rather than shameful. We were preparing ourselves. After breakfast, I brought my laptop to the kitchen table. "I want to make a spreadsheet of all your expenses," I explained. "Monthly fixed costs, variables, medical bills, everything. We need to see the complete picture." Dad brought out more papers from a file cabinet in the study. Utility bills, property tax statements, insurance documents. Mom added her own notes about grocery expenses and household needs. As we worked through the morning, creating a detailed picture of their financial situation, I saw my parents transform before my eyes. With each bill we discussed, each expense we documented, a little more tension left their shoulders. The secrecy that had burdened them was lifting. By the time we were ready to call the bank, just before noon, we had a clear understanding of where they stood financially and a plan for moving forward. I would cover the mortgage arrears immediately and help with the ongoing payments until Dad's medical situation was more stable. We would look into refinancing options to lower their monthly payment. Most importantly, we would communicate openly about money from now on. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone, but his voice was steady when he spoke to the bank representative. Mom and I sat beside him, listening to his side of the conversation. "Yes, this is Thomas Chin. Yes, regarding the mortgage for 1542 Lakeside Drive. I understand you've been trying to reach us." He explained the situation honestly, his medical issues, the unexpected bills, their attempts to keep up with partial payments. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize the problem. "My daughter is here with me now," he said, glancing at me. "She's aware of the situation, and we're prepared to bring the account current immediately." There was a pause as he listened to the representative. Then he handed the phone to me. "They want to speak with you, since your name is on the modification." I took the phone and identified myself, then confirmed that I was authorizing the payment to clear the arrears. The representative seemed relieved, explaining that our account had been flagged for potential foreclosure proceedings, but our payment would halt that process. When the call ended, the three of us sat in silence for a moment. Then Mom reached out, one hand taking mine, the other taking Dad's, forming a circle around the table. "Thank you," she said, simply looking at me. Dad nodded, words seemingly beyond him. "We're going to be okay," I told them both. All of us together. Later that afternoon, after I'd made the payment to the bank and we'd started organizing their medical bills for follow-up calls on Monday, I found Mom alone in the backyard. She was standing by her small vegetable garden, now mostly harvested for the season, with just a few hardy greens still growing. "Dad's taking a nap," I said as I approached. "The medication makes him tired." She nodded, not looking up from the plants she was tending. "He pushes himself too hard. Always has. That's part of what got us here." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "When your father's health problems started, he didn't tell me right away," she continued after a moment. "He didn't want me to worry. By the time I found out, he'd already missed several days of medication because he was trying to stretch it out, make it last longer. To save money, I guessed. Yes. And then his condition worsened, requiring more tests, more doctor visits." She sighed deeply. "We both made mistakes. He hid his health issues. I hid the financial ones. We thought we were protecting each other, but really, you were just making things worse," I finished for her. "Yes." She finally looked up at me, her eyes clearer now. "Your father and we've always prided ourselves on being strong, on never asking for help. When we came to this country, we had to be that way. No one was going to give us anything for free." I nodded, understanding. Their immigrant experience had shaped them profoundly. "But being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone," she continued, surprising me with her insight. "That's what I've realized today. True strength is knowing when to reach out." I smiled at her. "That's very wise, Mom." She returned the smile, a genuine one this time. "Well, I'm still learning." "We both are. Your father perhaps more slowly," she added with a small chuckle. "It's going to take time," I acknowledged. "Old habits die hard." "But they can die," she said firmly. "They must if we're going to move forward." As we stood there in the autumn sunlight, surrounded by the garden my mother had nurtured for years, I felt a shift in our family dynamic, subtle but significant. My parents had always been my protectors, my providers. Now we were moving into a new phase, one of mutual support and shared burdens. Tomorrow I would return to my apartment in the city, to my job and my life. But things would be different now. We had weekly financial check-ins scheduled. Dad had promised to be transparent about his medical appointments. Mom had agreed to let me set up automatic payments for their mortgage from my account. Small steps toward a new normal. A normal where my parents accepted that sometimes being taken care of was as important as taking care, and where I embraced my role not just as their daughter, but as their advocate and their partner in navigating this challenging time. The secret that had nearly cost them their home was now in the open, being addressed. But I couldn't help wondering what other secrets might be lurking, what other proud silences might be hiding truths that needed to be spoken. As autumn deepened into winter, our new family arrangements settled into place. I transferred money to cover my parents' mortgage each month, called Dad twice a week to check on his health, and drove out to their house every other weekend to help sort through medical bills and insurance claims. Things seemed to be improving. Dad's color was better, and he'd regained some of the weight he'd lost. Mom seemed less anxious, the tight lines around her mouth softening. The mortgage was current, and we'd worked out payment plans for most of the medical bills. But something still felt off. During my visits, I'd catch them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes their hushed conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room. Despite our agreement for complete transparency, I sensed they were still keeping something from me. How's Dad's medication working? I asked Mom one Saturday in December as we washed dishes side by side. Dad was in the living room, napping in his recliner. Good, good, she said quickly. The doctor says his numbers are improving. She scrubbed at a pot with unnecessary vigor. And you're getting all his prescriptions filled on time. I pressed. No more stretching out the medication. Of course, she assured me, not meeting my eyes. The pharmacy even delivers now. It's very convenient. I wanted to believe her, but doubt nagged at me. Last weekend, I'd noticed fewer pill bottles in the medicine cabinet than there should have been. When I'd mentioned it, Mom had mumbled something about organizing them differently. The next appointment with the cardiologist is in January, right? I asked, do you want me to come with you? Mom hesitated, just a fraction too long before answering. Oh, that won't be necessary. It's just a routine checkup. I dried a plate, slowly, choosing my next words carefully. Mom, we agreed to be honest with each other. If there's something you're not telling me. There's nothing, she interrupted, her voice sharper than usual. Realizing her tone, she softened. Really, Olivia, everything is fine. I let it drop, but the doubt remained. That evening, while Mom was showing me her latest quilting project in the spare room, I noticed Dad's laptop open on the desk. He rarely used it. Technology had never been his strong suit. But the screen showed an email inbox. Without thinking too much about what I was doing, I glanced at the most recent message. It was from First Capital Bank. Mom followed my gaze and quickly moved to close the laptop. Your father must have forgotten to shut it down, she said with forced casualness. But I'd seen enough. The email subject mentioned a second notice about something. Mom, I said firmly, what's going on with the bank now? She sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. We didn't want to worry you. Those words again, the same words that had led to our current situation. We promised no more secrets, I reminded her, trying to keep frustration from my voice. She perched on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking her full 65 years. It's not the mortgage, she said quickly. That's being paid, thanks to you. It's something else. What else could there be? I asked, sitting beside her. Mom twisted her hands in her lap. When your father first got sick, before we started missing mortgage payments, we took out a home equity loan. I felt the blood drain from my face. How much? $50,000, she whispered. The room seemed to tilt slightly. $50,000. On top of everything else. Why didn't you tell me this when we went through all your finances 3 months ago? My voice came out strangled. We thought we could manage it, she said, not meeting my gaze. The payments are smaller than the mortgage. We've been making the minimum payments, but what? I prompted when she trailed off. The interest rate adjusted up in November. Now we're struggling again. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. We didn't want to ask for more help. You're already doing so much. I stood and paced the small room, trying to process this new information. $50,000. A second loan against the house. Interest rates rising. It was a financial nightmare compounding on itself. Does Dad know you're telling me this? I asked. She nodded. He wanted to keep it from you longer, but I told him we couldn't. Not after what happened with the mortgage. Not after we promised you honesty. At least that was something. Progress of a sort. I need to see the paperwork, I said. All of it. And I need to know exactly what the money was used for. Mom led me to their bedroom, where she pulled a folder from the bottom drawer of her dresser. Most of it went to medical bills before we knew how serious your father's condition was, she explained as she handed me the folder. The tests, the specialists, none of it was covered by Medicare. We had to pay up front. I flipped through the documents. Loan origination paperwork, monthly statements, late notices. The most recent statement showed they owed almost the full principal. Their payments had barely touched it. And the rest of the money? I asked, looking up from the papers. A flicker of something, guilt? Fear, crossed my mother's face. Your father wanted to help Richard with his business, she said quietly. Richard, my older cousin on Dad's side, a perpetual dreamer with big ideas and little follow-through. The family's black sheep. You gave money to Richard? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. After all the failed ventures? After he never paid back the loan for his food truck? Your father believes in him, Mom said defensively. This business plan was different. Richard had investors, a solid plan for the restaurant. How much? I demanded. 20,000, she admitted. But Richard promised to pay it back with interest when the restaurant took off. I didn't need to ask if he'd made good on that promise. The answer was clear from the guilty look on her face. The restaurant never opened, did it? She shook her head. The other investors pulled out. Richard said he'd pay us back when he could, but he won't, I finished for her. Just like every other time Dad has invested in his schemes. I felt a surge of anger, not just at Richard, who was consistent in his unreliability, but at my father. How could he gamble with their financial security? How could he take out a loan against their home to fund another of Richard's doomed enterprises? But even as the anger rose, I understood. Dad saw himself in Richard, the immigrant with big dreams. The difference was that Dad had worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, played by the rules. Richard wanted the success without the struggle, and Dad, perhaps remembering his own early hardships, couldn't bear to see his nephew struggle when he had the means to help, even if those means were borrowed. Does Dad know that the loan payment has increased? I asked, returning to the immediate problem. Yes, that's why he's been working again. I stared at her. Working? Dad's working? Since when? Since the payment went up in November. Just part-time at the hardware store. 20 hours a week. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. The doctor said light activity would be good for him, as long as he doesn't overdo it. And is he overdoing it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom's silence was confirmation enough. I closed the folder and took a deep breath. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I need to talk to Dad. When he wakes up, not tonight. I'm not going to yell at him, I added, seeing the worry on her face. But we need to have an honest conversation about Richard and about Dad working against doctor's orders. Mom nodded, relief visible in her features. Second, I'll cover the home equity loan payment this month to stop any further action from the bank. But long term, we need a better solution. I'm going to look into consolidating your debts, maybe refinancing both loans together at a lower rate. You've already done so much, Mom protested weakly. And I'll continue to do what I can, I said firmly. You and Dad spent your lives taking care of me. Now it's my turn. She reached for my hand. We never wanted this for you. I know, I said, squeezing her fingers. But it's where we are. Later that night, after a subdued dinner where none of us mentioned the revelation of the home equity loan, I sat alone on the back porch. The December air was cold, but I needed the space to think, to process everything I'd learned. The door opened behind me, and Dad stepped out, wrapping a cardigan around himself. Your mother told me that you know about the second loan, he said without preamble, and about Richard. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without anger bleeding into my words. Dad sat heavily in the chair beside mine. You're upset. Yes, I'm upset, I admitted. Not just about the loan, but about the fact that you hid it from me when we were supposedly laying everything on the table 3 months ago. I was ashamed, he said simply, of my foolishness with Richard, of taking out a second loan against our home. And now? I asked. Still ashamed, he acknowledged, but also grateful. For you, for your help, for your understanding. We sat in silence for a moment, watching our breath form small clouds in the cold air. The hardware store job, I finally said. Mom tells me you're working 20 hours a week. Dad nodded, a hint of pride in his voice as he replied, Mr. Wilson was happy to have me back. I know the inventory better than the kids he usually hires. But the doctor said light activity, Dad interrupted. And it is light. Mostly I'm at the register or helping customers find what they need. And stocking shelves? Carrying bags of cement and fertilizer. I challenged. He looked away. Sometimes, when they're short-staffed. Dad, your heart. My heart is fine, he insisted, putting up with more force than necessary. The medication is working, and we need the money. No, you don't, I said firmly. Not at the expense of your health. I can help with the loan payments. You're already helping with the mortgage, he protested. We can't ask for more. You're not asking. I'm offering. I turned to face him directly. Dad, I make good money. The firm just landed 2 major projects that will keep us busy through next year. I have savings. I can handle this. He shook his head stubbornly. It's not right. Parents provide for children, not the other way around. That's not always true, I countered. In many cultures, adult children support their aging parents. It's considered normal, expected even. Not at our age, he said. We're not elderly. We should be able to take care of ourselves. I sighed, recognizing the pride that had gotten us into this mess in the first place. Dad, do you remember what you always told me when I was learning to ride a bike? It's okay to use training wheels until you're ready to ride without them. Think of this as training wheels, just until you get back on your feet financially. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, using my own words against me. Clever. I learned from the best, I said, returning his smile. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed deeply. I'll think about quitting the job, but I need to feel useful, Olivia. I can't just sit around while you pay all our bills. What if we find another way for you to contribute? I suggested. Something that doesn't strain your heart, but still lets you feel productive. Like what? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together. Dad reached over and patted my hand. When did you get so wise? Around the same time you got so stubborn, I teased gently. He chuckled, then grew serious again. About Richard. I don't want to talk about Richard, I said, feeling the anger resurface. I need to explain, Dad insisted. You think I was foolish, and maybe I was. But Richard reminds me so much of my brother, your Uncle Ming. This surprised me. Uncle Ming had died before I was born, and Dad rarely spoke of him. Ming had such dreams, Dad continued, his voice softening with memory. So many ideas. In China, there was no way for him to pursue them. When I got the chance to come to America, he made me promise that I would take risks he never could, that I would reach for opportunities. And you did, I said. You built a life here, a good life. Yes, but always the safe way. Work hard, save money, buy a house. He gazed out into the darkness of the yard. I never took the big risks Ming would have taken. When Richard comes to me with his ideas, his dreams, I see Ming. I see the opportunities my brother never had. And I want to give Richard the chance that Ming never got. I hadn't considered this perspective. Dad wasn't just being naive or foolish with Richard. He was honoring a promise to his brother, trying to give his nephew what he couldn't give Ming. I understand that, I said gently. But Dad, Richard isn't Uncle Ming. He's had plenty of chances, and he's taken advantage of your generosity repeatedly. Dad nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right. Your mother says the same. He sighed heavily. I've told Richard this was the last time, that we can't help him anymore. Do you mean it this time? I asked. I do, he said firmly. Our home is at risk. Our future. I won't gamble with that again. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I'd heard similar promises before, whenever one of Richard's ventures failed. Still, the conviction in Dad's voice gave me hope that maybe this time was different. Will you at least ask Richard to repay some of what he owes you? I asked. It would help with your situation. Dad looked uncomfortable. He says the restaurant investors might reconsider if the economy improves. If that happens… Dad, I interrupted. The money is gone. Richard isn't going to pay it back. He never does. Dad's shoulder slumped. You're probably right, he admitted. I just wanted so badly for him to succeed. For Ming's dreams to live on through him. I softened, understanding his motivation, even if I couldn't approve of his actions. Uncle Ming would be proud of what you've accomplished, I told him. You don't need Richard to fulfill any promises to your brother. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the cold eventually driving us back inside. Over the next few weeks, I dove into research on debt consolidation, refinancing options, and medical billing advocacy. I learned more about financial planning in a month than I had in my entire life. Each weekend visit to my parents involved spreadsheets, phone calls, and strategy sessions at the kitchen table. Dad did quit the hardware store job. Reluctantly at first, but with increasing acceptance as his health improved without the added strain. Instead, he began volunteering at the local community center twice a week, teaching basic Mandarin to children and adults, something he enjoyed that didn't tax his heart. Mom, seeing the burden of their finances lifting, seemed to grow younger. The worry lines that had aged her prematurely began to fade. She started a small sewing circle with neighborhood women, something she'd always wanted to do, but never had the mental space for when financial worries consumed her. By February, we had a plan in place. I had taken over both loan payments temporarily while we worked with a nonprofit credit counseling agency to consolidate their debts. We'd applied for financial assistance programs for Dad's ongoing medical expenses and had already received approval for one that would cover 60% of his medication costs. Most importantly, the secrecy was gone. When a new medical bill arrived, they called me immediately. When they worried about an expense, we discussed it openly. The shame that had driven their silence was slowly being replaced by a practical approach to their situation. One snowy Saturday in late February, I arrived at their house to find them both unusually animated. Mom practically pulled me inside, taking my coat and scarf with excited hands. We have news, she announced, guiding me to the kitchen where Dad sat at the table beaming. Good news, I hope? I asked, glancing between them. Very good, Dad confirmed, sliding an envelope across the table to me. I opened it to find a check for $5,000, made out to my father. What's this? I asked, confused. Richard, Mom said, a note of surprise still in her voice. He sent it last week. I stared at the check in disbelief. Richard paid you back? Voluntarily. Dad nodded, pride evident in his expression. Not the full amount, of course, but he included a letter saying this is the first installment. He's found investors for a new project, not a restaurant this time, but an app development company. He already has a contract with a local business. I was skeptical. Richard had made promises before. And you believe him? I checked, Mom said, surprising me. I called the business he mentioned. They confirmed they're working with Richard's team. It seems legitimate this time. His girlfriend is a software engineer, Dad added. Very smart, very driven. I think she's been a good influence. I handed the check back to them, not sure what to say. Of all the possible sources of financial relief, Richard had been at the bottom of my list. I know you have your doubts, Dad said, reading my expression. So do I, after so many disappointments. But even if this is the only payment we ever receive, it helps. And it shows he's trying, Mom added. I nodded, unwilling to dampen their enthusiasm. What will you do with it? Put it toward the home equity loan, Dad said immediately. Every bit helps reduce the principal. I was impressed. 6 months ago, he might have been tempted to reinvest in Richard's new venture. The fact that he wasn't even considering that option showed how much his perspective had shifted. We've been talking, Mom said, glancing at Dad. About the house. What about it? I asked, suddenly alert. Were they considering selling? It's too big for just the two of us, Dad explained. 3 bedrooms, the large yard. We don't need all this space anymore. We're thinking about downsizing, Mom continued. Moving to a smaller place, maybe a condominium. Something with less maintenance, lower property taxes. And no stairs, Dad added with a rueful smile. The doctor says they're not good for my heart. I considered their proposal. It made practical sense. A smaller place would mean lower expenses across the board. But this was their home, filled with 30 years of memories. Are you sure? I asked. This isn't just about the money, is it? It started that way, Mom admitted. But the more we talked about it, the more sense it made. We're getting older. The yard work is becoming difficult for your father. The cleaning, the maintenance, it's a lot. We don't need this much space, Dad reiterated. Just enough for us, and a guest room for when you visit. I looked around the kitchen, where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations, where I'd done homework while Mom cooked, where Dad had taught me to use chopsticks correctly. The thought of them leaving was bittersweet. If that's what you want, I said slowly, I'll help however I can. We can look at options, figure out what makes the most financial sense. We've already started researching, Mom said eagerly. There's a new condominium development just 10 minutes from here. 1-level living, no maintenance, and they have amenities, a pool, a community center. And it's much less expensive than maintaining this house, Dad added. Their enthusiasm was genuine, I realized. This wasn't just a financial decision. It was a lifestyle choice they were embracing. When can I see this place? I asked. Tomorrow, Mom said promptly. We have an appointment with the sales office at noon. We hoped you would come with us. Of course, I agreed. I want to make sure it's a good investment. And a good home, Dad added softly. I reached across the table and took his hand. Yes, a good home. As winter turned to spring, our plans took shape. My parents put their house on the market in March, priced reasonably to ensure a quick sale. To everyone's surprise, they received 3 offers within a week, all above asking price. The housing market in their suburb had heated up, with families looking for more space outside the city. They signed a contract for a 2-bedroom condominium in the new development, using the proceeds from their house sale to pay off both the mortgage and the home equity loan completely. The closing dates aligned perfectly. They would move directly from one place to the other with no temporary housing needed. I helped them sort through 30 years of accumulation, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. It was a cathartic process for all of us. Each item had a story and memory attached. Some were easy to let go of. Others required long conversations and sometimes tears before a decision was made. Through it all, I marveled at the change in my parents. The secrecy and shame that had clouded our relationship 6 months ago had been replaced by openness and shared purpose. They consulted me on decisions large and small, not because they couldn't decide for themselves, but because they valued my input. The weekend before their move, I helped Mom pack the last of the kitchen items. Dad was meeting with the real estate attorney to review the closing paperwork one final time. I found these while clearing out the attic, Mom said, placing a shoebox on the counter. I thought you might want them. I opened the box to find stacks of cards and letters I'd sent them over the years. Birthday cards from when I was in elementary school, with wobbly handwriting and stick figure drawings. Letters from college, detailing my classes and new friends. Postcards from my first business trips as a junior architect. You kept all of these? I asked, touched by the collection. Mom nodded, smiling softly. Every one. Even the grocery lists you would make for me when you were 6, playing store. I laughed, leafing through the childish drawings and earnest teenage letters. I can't believe you saved these all these years. They're treasures, Mom said simply. Pieces of you. I came across a letter I'd written during my first year of college, when homesickness had hit hard. I'd poured my heart out about how much I missed them, how their support was the only thing keeping me going through the challenging transition. "I remember this," I said, holding up the letter. "I was so miserable that first semester. I wanted to come home every weekend." "But you didn't," Mom reminded me. "You stuck it out. You found your strength." "Because I knew you were behind me," I said. "Even when you weren't physically there, I felt your support." Mom took my hand. "That's what family is, Olivia. Being there for each other, even when we're apart. Supporting each other through the hard times." I squeezed her hand, understanding the parallel she was drawing to our current situation. Like now, she agreed. "Your father and we were raised to believe that parents should never burden their children. That asking for help was a failure." She shook her head. "But that's not what family means." "Not really." "No," I agreed. "Real family is about mutual support, taking turns being strong for each other." "Exactly." Mom's eyes shone with unshed tears. "It took us too long to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful we did, even if it came with some hard lessons along the way." "Me too," I said softly. The day of the move dawned clear and warm. Perfect weather for a new beginning. The moving company arrived early, efficiently loading the furniture and boxes my parents had decided to keep. By afternoon, they were settling into their new condominium, arranging familiar items in unfamiliar spaces, creating their new home. I watched as Dad carefully hung a family photo on the living room wall. The three of us at my college graduation, arms around each other, beaming with pride. It was the first decoration to go up in their new place. "Perfect," he declared, stepping back to admire it. The most important things came with us. Mom emerged from the kitchen, where she'd been arranging dishes. "This place already feels like home," she said, looking around the bright, open space with satisfaction. "It suits you," I agreed. The condominium was modern, low maintenance, and all on one level, perfect for them as they aged. The community had walking paths, a pool, and a clubhouse where residents gathered for events. Already, Mom had signed up for a quilting group that met weekly. "We should have done this years ago," Dad said, settling onto their familiar couch, now positioned to take advantage of the natural light from the balcony doors. "All that time maintaining a house too big for us. But we needed the space when Olivia was growing up," Mom reminded him. "And later, we couldn't have afforded to move without taking on more debt. And now?" I asked, curious about how they viewed their financial situation. "Now we're debt-free for the first time in 30 years, Dad said, his voice reflecting his wonder at the concept. "The house sale covered everything. We own this place outright. And our monthly expenses are half what they were," Mom added. "With the money we're saving, plus your father's pension and my part-time income, we can actually build our savings again." "Plus Richard's payments," Dad said with cautious optimism. The second installment had arrived right on schedule, another $5,000 toward the debt, now fully repaid through the house sale. Richard had promised to continue paying until the full amount was returned, despite my parents telling him it wasn't necessary anymore. "I still can't believe he's following through," I admitted. "People can surprise you," Dad said. "Sometimes they just need the right motivation." "Or the right partner," Mom added, referring to Richard's girlfriend, who seemed to be the stabilizing force behind his newfound reliability. As evening approached, I helped them unpack the essentials for their first night: bedding, toiletries, coffee maker for the morning. The rest could wait. They had time now to settle in properly. "Will you stay for dinner?" Mom asked. I could order something. Our first meal in the new place should be special. "I'd love to," I said, "but I actually have plans." I hesitated, then decided it was time. "I'm meeting someone." "For dinner?" Mom's eyebrows shot up with interest. "Someone, like a date someone?" I nodded, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "His name is Daniel." He's an engineer who worked on one of our firm's projects. We've been seeing each other for about a month. A month? Dad exclaimed. And you're just telling us now? I wanted to be sure it was serious before I mentioned him, I explained. With everything else going on, it didn't seem important. Of course it's important, Mom said, her eyes bright with excitement. Our daughter's happiness is always important. You should bring him to dinner soon, Dad suggested. We want to meet this engineer. I will, I promised. Maybe next weekend, after you're settled. As I prepared to leave, gathering my purse and keys, I felt a wave of emotion. So much had changed in the past 6 months. What had started with a panicked drive to my parents' house after a bank call had led to a complete transformation of our relationship. The secrets and shame that had nearly cost them their home had given way to honesty and mutual support. Dad walked me to the door while Mom continued unpacking in the bedroom. Thank you, Olivia, he said quietly. Not just for the financial help, but for forcing us to be honest. With you and with ourselves. You don't need to thank me, Dad. That's what family does. I hugged him tightly, feeling the steadiness of his heartbeat against my cheek. Yes, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. That's what family does. I just wish we'd understood that sooner. Better late than never, I said with a smile as I pulled back. And we have plenty of time to practice our new normal. We do, he nodded. Now go enjoy your date. Don't keep this Daniel waiting. As I drove away from their new home toward my evening plans, I reflected on the journey we'd taken together. 6 months ago, a phone call had shattered the illusion that my parents had everything under control. Their pride and shame had nearly cost them their home and threatened their health. My anger at their deception had strained our relationship to its limits. But from that crisis had emerged something stronger, a new understanding of what it meant to be family. Not just parent and child with roles set in stone, but 3 adults supporting each other through life's challenges, taking turns being strong when others needed help. The bank's call that had seemed like a disaster had actually been a blessing in disguise. It had forced us to confront the secrets between us and rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. As I pulled up to the restaurant where Daniel waited, I sent a silent thanks to that anonymous bank representative who had left the voicemail that changed everything. Sometimes the calls we dread most are the ones we need to receive. My parents no longer needed my money to save their home, but they had accepted something more valuable, the understanding that true family strength comes not from hiding our struggles, but from facing them together.